Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending our talk. This will be about our research into an operation that we call domestic kitten. Just to briefly introduce ourselves, my name is Aseel. I am a malware analyst at Checkpoint Research, and most of my work concentrates on attacks and threat groups within the Middle East.
Hello, I'm Lotem Finkelstein, the head of threat intelligence in Checkpoint. And shall we start?
Yeah. So, like every good story, this story started with VirusTotal. It actually started with an Android application that I found, which was submitted to VirusTotal back in August 2018. And this app only had 3 detections at first. But what really caught my attention in this case was the name of the app. And the name was base64 encoded by VirusTotal because it included some UTF-8 characters, but decoding it gave us the original file name back, which was in Arabic and could be roughly translated into the state of the Islamic Caliphate.apk. So I was immediately curious when I saw this, because this is basically an app that is called ISIS, and it had 3 detections on VT, and I wanted to see what it does. And so when I installed this app on a device, to my surprise, the only thing that it seemed to be doing was to change the wallpapers of that device to ISIS-related images, like the one with the warriors right here, or an image with an ISIS 1Z, or a cake with ISIS icing. Sure. And because this functionality looked exceptionally stupid to me, and why would you need an app to change wallpapers, I decided to take a deeper look into the code and see what this application does. And I started out with the manifest file of the APK to see where the main activity is located, and I saw that it is in the base package of the APK. And I also saw that the application does receive permissions to change the wallpapers of the device, in addition to a few other things, which it may not need for that functionality. And the app contained other packages in addition to the base package, but the base one was in charge of all the wallpaper changing bit. And when the main activity is called, it actually calls another class by the name of utils, which is imported from a different package. And that package was much more interesting. First off, you might see that its name has a typo. It says COM Andriod browser instead of Android. And we can see some of the classes, or we'll take a look into some of the classes that this Andriod package contained, because this was the more interesting part of the app. So starting out with the defines class in this package, as the name suggests, it defines variables for the app to use. So it sets a username, which is supposed to be a short description or a code name of what the app does, a version number, which is 5.6.0 in this case, and a server address, which is a string. It's not even a server address. Surprisingly, the app never references the username or the server address values in this case. And it redefines them in the settings class. So these previous values are never used in the code, they're never referenced, and they're absolutely useless and could have been removed from the code. I think they were left there from a previous version of the app. Interestingly enough, the new username value in this case is the Arabic or Persian word for ISIS, Daesh, so it fits the theme of the app. And the server address in this case is a real website. Another useless piece of code in this class is the backup address, which is the same as the server address, so it wouldn't really back it up because it is the same one. If it's down, both would be down. When the main activity is called, or when it starts and it calls the utils class, util starts a service by the name of AM service. And AM service, among other things, defines a device name for the device that is installed on and a unique device ID. And it then calls the command manager class. The command manager class takes the device ID we've just seen, appends it to the server address, so it sends it as a parameter to the get function PHP, and it can receive back different commands for the application to perform certain tasks on the device. So the application parses those commands and it can perform certain things on the system. And the commands look like this. So we can see that the app can receive more than one command at once. The different commands are separated by 3 equal signs, and the command and its parameters are separated by 3 tilde signs. In this case, the get command would be telling the app to gather all of the contacts, all of the browsing history, all of the SMS messages, build a textual log of each kind of data, and upload that log to the server. The same command can also steal files from the system, so it could just specify the file name as a parameter, and that file will be uploaded to the server as well. And the take command can take pictures with the device's phone, record video, audio, or even record calls. So if someone wanted to change their wallpapers into something ISIS-related that is really too bad for them, because using those commands, the app can steal all of this information from the infected device, given the right commands. And seeing this, again, I became even more curious, and I wanted to see if there are more samples that are related to this, or if this attack has been going on for a while. Because, again, this is potentially an attacker or a group of attackers that are looking to monitor all of the sensitive data from supposedly ISIS supporters or people that are interested in ISIS. And I wanted to hunt for more samples. And I did that using 3 very basic methods. The first one is quite obvious. I looked to see if I could find other samples that communicate with the CNC that we have seen. Next, I also looked at the APK certificate. So the APK file that we started with was signed, and it had a certificate that became valid in 2016, and it also used a unique email address. So I could also look up to see if there are other apps that were signed with the with a certificate that mentions this email address. And lastly, I used a lot of the spelling mistakes and typos and grammatical mistakes that were found in the app. So it wasn't only the package name, the Andriod instead of Android, that was misspelled. All over the code, there were strings and comments that had a lot of weird syntax, a lot of grammatical mistakes, a lot of typos that could help me, first off, to understand that whoever developed this code is probably not a native English speaker. But second of all, that I can use those unique instances to hunt for more samples that mention the same strings. And you can see, for example, in those examples, that the app documents a lot of the exceptions that it runs into. So if an error occurs, it would tell us why that happened. And we can see words like thread, missing an E, or weird syntax like wait to device, obtain location. And I can use that to find related samples. So combining the 3 techniques together led me to find more than 200 backdoored applications that I believe were operated by the same attackers. All right. So the backdoor that we started out with, or the malicious application, was intended for a very specific target audience. But in truth, the other malicious samples that we have found were a bit more diverse than that. So they had different themes to try and lure the victims into downloading them. Although we did notice that what they have in common is that they are mainly targeted at people in the Middle East. So those were themes that are more relevant for certain ethnic groups, certain religious groups, and certain minorities within the Middle East. A lot of them were also in Arabic and in Persian. And there were some generic apps that could be downloaded by anyone, a lot of Telegram add-ons, chatting applications, VPN services and whatnot, but really those are also apps that are very popular in the Middle East and could be used to target that audience as well. And sometimes when I wanted to see, or when I wanted to look up those malicious applications to try and see if I can gather more information about them, those searches would lead me to results from Google's Play Store with apps with the exact same name and the exact same package name, except those apps are benign. And I soon realized that the attackers don't really develop the decoy content themselves. They just take legitimate apps and add the malicious component to them and then redistribute them. And this is a comparison between one example, one app that we downloaded from Google's Play Store and another domesticated sample, which we can see has the malicious package added to it. Speaking of malicious packages, we've looked into one variant so far, but we realized that there are more malicious packages that were developed by the attackers, and this wasn't the only one. And we were even able to construct a timeline of the different packages that the domesticated attackers use. We can see that the earliest variant we have been able to attribute with high confidence to those attackers goes back to 2015. And since then, almost every year, they have introduced new packages and new malicious code that they have used in their attacks. Despite that, that doesn't really prevent them from using the old variants. So we can see that some of the 2017 code is still being used nowadays, and it's still being used this year as well. And lastly, the last package that we see here, the ComGolf RV, was reported by Trend Micro this year as Golf Spy, although again, we believe this is operated by the domestic Kitten attackers. And lastly, for the CNC communication, I have mentioned only one website so far, but all of the samples that we've discovered reveal to us that there are more IP addresses and more domains that belong to these attackers, and this is not just one website, so the infrastructure was wider than what we originally thought or what we originally expected. And what was really cool about all of those CNC websites is that they all had open directory indexing. Lotem?
Yeah, so this is a build-up. This brings us to the next part of the presentation, which is our insights into the inner workings of the operation and our thoughts of who might be behind it. The logs that we have found on the server on the servers look like this at first. Then the file's name was made up of the unique victim ID followed by date and time in which the logs were generated. At first, we thought that they were encoded in some way, base64, for example, but when we tried to decode them, we discovered that there is no readable text there. So at that point, we came to realize that they were encrypted in some way, and for us to decrypt them, we will need the encryption key that was used to encrypt them. And luckily, we had the source code of the applications that generated those logs. So we did, and we saw that the encryption key was actually the unique victim ID that can be found in every file's name of every log. So it was very easy to us to just write a script and decrypt them all, which we did. And we saw that the logs are indeed in the way that they were sent to the server themselves. And through those logs, we were able to tell much about the operation and how massive it is, and many other new findings that discovered more of this operation. In regards to the victim distribution, now that we have access to the logs, we can tell who are the victims, and we know that the operation out of these logs was focused on the Middle East with Persian victim from Iran, Arabic-speaking victim from Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and even Kurdish-speaking one. But the majority of the victims were actually Iranian citizens. And we will get back to this detail, to this fact later. We can also tell that throughout the operation and using the different command control servers, they were able to collect 100,000 contacts at the day that we uncovered the operation back then in August 2018. And this is very dangerous because it means that not only the victims are exposed, but anyone that they were in touch with. We can also tell that 400,000 messages were collected out of the infected devices, the messages that were exchanged between the victims and their contacts. And this is interesting because the messages were in different languages and dialects, and it means that someone was able to digest vast amount of data in different languages and dialects, and also in different data formats like text, audio, video. And at this point, we realized that we are facing with some operation that can be associated with nation state, because behind this cyber operation must stand intelligence unit, an intelligence unit that's capable of digesting this amount of data, of translating this data into intelligence. But this is not the wildest thing that we have found on the server. On the servers, there were a lot of media in there and text. And what I'm about to share with you is a sensitive data, so I ask you not to take photos for the next 6 slides. You will figure out when you can take photos.
So from the data Lotem presented that we found on the servers, but also from the backdoors that we have seen, we see that this attack is really focused on the Middle East. And this is not really something new in this region. Actually, in the threat landscape in the Middle East, there have been a lot of attacks that are similar to domestic Kitten. And I'm just going to cover a few in the next slide. I know there are a lot more out there. But for example, if we take a look at threat groups such as Kayal, which was uncovered by Lookout and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, believed to be operating from Lebanon and also targeting different victims in the Middle East. APTC 23, for example, which we've looked into in addition to other vendors, and we know that it has been after victims mainly in the Palestinian Authority and a lot of government officials there. And also Zoopark, which was a threat group reported by Kaspersky, I believe, about 2 years ago. And those attacks have their differences, and they're really different in certain ways, but we know that they use the mobile attack vector mainly for cyber espionage motivations. And if I were to characterize them all or summarize their activity, I would say that they follow a kind of low sophistication, high impact kind of model when it comes to their threats. Because if we look at the technical side of those operations, we can see that their attack vector isn't really something new. They don't really use 0 days or unknown vulnerabilities in their samples, and they don't introduce new persistence methods or things like that. So they use well-known tactics to go after their victims. And in terms of their operation security, they're really not the best at that. I mean, we see how careless they are with their servers, just like what Lotem presented and what we've seen in domestic Kitten. The same happened with Kayal, and researchers were able to see who they were after. The same happened with Zoopark with the lame PT leak. So again, in terms of the OPSEC, really not the best. And yet, despite all of that, they managed to get their hands on a ton of sensitive data. They managed to infect a lot of high-profile victims, mainly due to their social engineering tricks and their knowledge of their target audience and the way in which they craft their malware to match that target audience and to let them download it and convince them to download it. So what they lack in the technical side, they make up for in the social engineering bit, and we do really see how much harm they cause and how effective those attacks were. And domestic Kitten is no different. It actually really follows this model in terms of its operation. And if I'm already comparing domestic Kitten to other threat groups, I've also compared domestic Kitten a lot to Zoopark, because I believe the two threat groups are quite similar when it comes to their TTPs. And I've actually seen that one of the CNC addresses that we've attributed to domestic Kitten and another that was attributed by Kaspersky to Zoopark shared some whois information. This whois information doesn't really tell us a lot about who registered the domain itself. It belongs to an Iranian hosting company, but it is still interesting to note that the two threat groups have used the same services and that their infrastructure has some Iranian fingerprints to it.
The similarities that we see, a part of the similarities that we see to other Iranian APT groups and attacks, we could find many other more fingerprints that connect this specific operation to Iran. For example, turning it on. For example, we have the firmware system update.com CNC. And while nothing connects it to Iran specifically, it is not hosted there or anything else, we can see that the name servers that were used for this specific domain are Persi host, or in other words, Persian host, which is an Iranian hosting company that has nothing to do with this operation specifically, but they were using this specific company. And we can see also that although nowadays it is hosted in the Netherlands, for one day it was hosted in Iran when it was initiated. So there are all kinds of fingerprints that connect this specific domain to Iran, but there are other fingerprints that connect other command and control servers, other infrastructure artifacts to Iran. For example, we can see that part of the domains that were hosted on the different IPs here were hosted there, along with other along with other domains that have the Iranian TLD. And regarding the victimology that I discussed before, we can see that although they were targeting ISIS advocates and Yemen soldiers and officials and Kurdish minority and such, they were mainly targeting Iranian citizens, specifically till August 2018. And this is weird considering the fact that I said that there are Iranian fingerprints in this operation. But we must remember that for the Islamic Republic of Iran, the stability of the region, the region is above all. And even inner threats like opponents of the regime may become targets of espionage campaign. And this is why we decided to call this operation a domestic Kitten. And of course, that the rest of the targets, the ISIS, the Yemen soldiers, and other Kurdish minorities, also aligned with the political interest of Iran and also well reflect the tension within the Middle East region. And lastly, we decided to bring noteworthy comments that we have found throughout the code of recent version of this operation. I must mention first that in very early versions of this operation, we have found many comments in Persian, but it was not that shocking. In recent versions from 2018, for example, we saw many references to the COSAR project, as if it is the internal name of their project, COSAR. Looking on Google what COSAR is, we found that the COSAR is actually a homemade, self-produced fighter jet in Iran, and it is considered to be a national pride. So maybe our developers, the developers of Domestic Kitten, also consider their operation, their crafted application as national pride. So to conclude this, we see a lot of fingerprints that lead back to Iran, including the analysis of the victimology of this campaign. So we tend to believe that it has something to do with Iran or even with the Iranian government there. That's it. Do you want to conclude?
Yeah, I guess. You're almost done with this. Almost. All right. So to conclude, the attackers of Domestic Kitten have been utilizing the mobile attack vector to go after their victims, mainly, again, due to the fact that the areas in which they're targeting, this is kind of a very popular platform, more than other areas, I would say. And again, they're likely to find a lot of sensitive information about individuals by tracking their phones, so we can really see them taking advantage of that. And also, in a lot of the countries which they targeted, unofficial downloads of mobile applications are very popular, considering a lot of sanctions on the official Play Store and on other applications. So again, we see that it might be very easy to convince people to download APKs not from official sources or just a file that someone sent you. So it will make its way to a device a lot easier than, say, other countries. This attack has been going on for years. The earliest variant we have shown you goes back to 2015, but again, it may have roots older than that. We started with version 5.6.0 in the backdoor that we've seen at first. The earliest one I found, I believe, was the 4-point-something, and not all versions of the backdoors had that numbering system, so I'm wondering what about the first or the second version here, which years do they go back to? And again, this may have been active for longer than what we've seen, but it has at least 5 years of activity and still managed to remain under the radar and not be detected for a while, surprisingly. And lastly, like Lotem mentioned, there are a lot of artifacts that we have been able to associate with those attackers that have had a lot of Iranian fingerprints in them in terms of the code, in terms of the used infrastructure and the hosting companies that they have had. And also, when it comes to the political targeting of this attack as well, we can see that it really aligns with some of the people that the Islamic Republic of Iran might be after. So again, it is highly likely that this attack is coming from this country. And that'd be all. Thank you.